Last topic, diversity and conservation. So, here we go. Whooping cranes, something of a success story. In the mid-1900s, the population was down to 16 wild individuals, obviously very close to extinction, and only one site where they were breeding. So anything happening there, they'd be wiped out. A lot of the loss was due to people filling in wetlands for other uses. Also hunting, cranes are edible, but with intensive effort, do have now close to 500 birds in the wild. Additional locations for breeding have been started, and this is growing and recovering. The whooping cranes are the tallest birds for North America. Humans have a major impact on the world around us. There's over 7 billion people, and textbook said they're into almost every habitat on Earth. Well, not so much on the underwater ones or high in the air, but certainly the land habitats. As we noted before, and think about populations, there's a challenge just how much Earth can support. What standard of living do we think people need to have? What sort of natural area protections are we going to want to have? What species protection? Do we think about this theologically? For example, John Stott, well-known theologian, referred to human-caused extinctions as a form of blasphemy, destruction of parts of God's creation. So there are theological things we might think about here as well. Here are some examples, the textbook examples for human-caused extinctions. We have the passenger pigeon, which was extremely abundant across eastern North America at the time of European arrival. By the late 1800s, the last of the massive flocks were gone, and only a few years later, the last wild bird was seen. One hung on into a zoo for another decade or two. Massive flocks reported to cover the sky, and of course, underneath, the ground got covered with some things too. But having massive flocks, no predator could eat them all. They depended on having those huge numbers. Overhunting, and there's no longer the critical number, and the species disappears quickly. The great auk was a flightless seabird found across the northern Atlantic, being flightless, relatively vulnerable to people when they came ashore for nesting and were easily hunted. Dodo, another flightless bird, islands, areas, birds often get flightless, and that tends to make them easy to catch when humans or human-introduced predators come around. The dodo, in this case, was on Mauritius Island in the Indian Ocean, somewhat towards Madagascar. A giant pigeon, basically. The golden tern was in tropical Central America, Panama area. It was accidentally wiped out by an introduced chytrid fungus pathogen people accidentally brought to the area. Apiornis, the elephant bird, a giant, heavy, flightless bird from Madagascar, somewhat in the same general group like ostriches and emus and rheas and cassowaries. But these became extinct after people arrived in Madagascar. Down here we have a skeleton of a mastodon from New York. Mastodons die out in North America not too long after people get established. These here are freshwater mussels, a couple of species that used to live in the Tennessee and Ohio River drainage region, wiped out by the dams and other human impact. Similarly, these specimens here are all a group of snails wiped out by the dams on the Coosa River in Alabama. Biological diversity. What variation do we have in organisms? And we could look at the diversity of a particular area, a group, or all sorts of things. As we noted in talking about communities, we can think about taxon richness, just how many kinds. There's also genetic diversity. For example, a cornfield may have a huge number of plants, and they're all clonal seeds. Not any genetic diversity in there. So, what variety in genetics there is? And that's very important because, again, environments vary. And so, a little bit different in the DNA might do a little better, say, in the wetter part of the environment, or in the warmer part, or different things like that. So having genetic diversity helps a species survive. Losing genetic diversity is likely to be a bad thing. And we can also think about ecosystem diversity. Different combinations of organisms and the non-living environment. Preserving not just specific types, but the whole ecosystems. And in order to help maintain the life of the world around us, we need to think about all of these. How many different kinds of things there are, and number of kinds, we can think both, say, types of species, and also what they do, different features. Again, all these can be looked at many different levels. We could study DNA and see what sort of variation we find. These happen to be American oyster catcher, a bird that you might see along the coast. As the name suggests, they feed quite a lot on shellfish, including oysters. They are part of a broader community of different types of birds and other animals that would live along a sandy to muddy shoreline area. And that shoreline is part of a larger set of ecosystems ranging from on under the water, along the beach, up into the dunes, the coastal ecosystems there. If there's too little genetic diversity, you're likely to end up with extinction. And so, trying to analyze this, how much diversity is present, and how can we preserve the genetic diversity? There's a lot of variation. Some types of species really need a lot of individuals, like I mentioned for the passenger pigeon. Others can get by with very small populations. For example, cheetahs, it looks like, based on analysis of the DNA, that there were very few individuals that survived on the order of, I think it's about 100,000 years back. They had a serious crash in their population, but they have recovered. So some things are able to manage with very small populations, some not. It takes some analysis of the biology and other features. We're causing quite high levels of extinction today, due pretty much to human activity. Now, there have been some big ones in the past as well. Is today bigger than past? Probably not than all the past ones at any rate. No, we had things like the end of the dinosaurs. One early, not too long after the first dinosaurs, there was a big extinction. First dinosaurs are not long after a very, very big extinction, although that one's complicated. You had a big extinction and not much recovery after that before an even bigger one hit. So the combined effect of those two is our biggest total one there. Important terminology. We have endangered versus threatened. Endangered means that it is at risk of becoming extinct and it is likely to take human action to do something about it. Threatened is a species that is close to being endangered. And so if we take some action now, probably doesn't have to be as dramatic, we can counteract that and prevent it becoming endangered. Now, challenge here, we have official legal definitions. Countries and states and things decide to identify certain species as endangered or threatened. There's also the actual biologists going out and assessing the rankings of things. So you can see different rankings, for example, if you're looking at the legal U.S. listing of what is considered endangered or threatened for the whole country. Individual states can have different listings, and also you have things like NatureServe, International Union of Conservation of Nature, that have their own rankings of species assessing what are endangered, threatened, so forth. Some things are quite rare, but the paperwork hasn't been done to officially list them, for example.